that day I live in a dream. I live in a dream.
Welcome to Only Trying to Help, the podcast where we try to help you be helpful to other people. My name is Kate Watson, and I've got a longtime friend. I almost said old friend. A longtime friend, Ryan. Do you want to introduce yourself, Ryan?
Thank you, Kate. So my name is Ryan Eakin. I have known Kate since our days in university. Won't say how many years ago at this point. We have lived some experiences together, but quickly, I have worked in talent acquisition and recruiting for over 14 years. 7.5 years of that was in healthcare. And then recently, the past 7 or so years, I've worked in tech and media at Google, Twitter, TikTok, and then the New York Times for 3.5 years. I currently live in Washington, D.C. suburbs with 2 beautiful poodle puppies. And I'm here to talk about essentially the unhelpful but well-meaning advice people love to give when you're either laid off or job searching. I've been doing this for over 14 years. I have read a minimum of 20,000 resumes, I'm sure. I have been laid off 3 times, and I'm currently laid off. So I have a lot of excellent insights of what just annoys me and what annoys other people when I help coach them.
Gosh, you're well organized. You know exactly what we're doing here. I'm just gonna I feel like I should kick back with my coffee and just let you be the DJ here. I guess I want to ask, do you have these ranked? Is there a number one most annoying thing, or do you want to just kind of tell us the gamut of these things?
No, that's a good question. I guess to give a little bit more focus on what I would rank, right? So if you're starting with well-meaning, but not always the best helpfulness when an individual gets laid off, I would say the first thing to do is just tell someone, you just got to get out there. Completely dismissing the feelings of rejection, right? Like when an individual is being told, oh, hey, you've been a high performer, or we love you, but we no longer have money for you. While it's a business case, it can create a lot of emotional instability, right? Like feelings of rejection, feelings of unworthiness, and you need to process that. And a lot of people don't give themselves space and time to sit with those feelings of I didn't do anything wrong, but I'm still suffering the consequences of unemployment, financial insecurity, and instability. So the first advice that people love to give, and they gave it to me a lot recently, and I won't say who, and I love my friends because I really know they're just trying to help me. But just saying, it's going to be okay. You're going to figure it out. I support you. I love you. And then, they're like, you just got to get out there immediately. Right. And it's no, you got to sit with that for a little bit. And that's the worst advice that I say.
You're talking about a moment to breathe, a moment to grieve, a moment to just acknowledge what you've been through. And, I think you're also describing the complexity of you may feel in your heart in that moment, I've been rejected. I feel unworthy or uncared for or unvalued. And what you're wrestling with is your head is trying to kick in and say, no, listen, these are just business decisions. This is life. It happens to everybody. And while you're in that wrestling match of head and heart, people jump in and want to try and fix that for you.
Exactly. You're still, and it's going to take time to process all of that, right? Anytime there's an end or a termination to a relationship, a death, you're grieving. And a lot of people don't realize and think about that immediately. It is a grieving process. Your identity is sometimes tied to your work, right? Your routine, your schedule. You suddenly have that snatched away. And then you have to decide, who am I now tomorrow morning? It is a process of grieving. So while people really just want to help and they start sending you all these type of LinkedIn jobs, and I guess that's kind of the second thing, right? When people say, you just got to get out there, you got to apply to as many jobs as possible, as quick as possible. And my advice is, don't do that. Like, as much as people want to help and they will send you LinkedIn messages, if you have a great network and friends, you got to take a beat. Like, let me rephrase that also and qualify it. If you have the financial resources, not everybody has the opportunity to take a beat. But if you are in a situation, you really want to give yourself, I recommend, at least 3 to 4 weeks before you start even looking for a job. You're going to need to rewrite your resume multiple times. While people are going to, really want to dive in and help, I recommend just pausing, right? And be honest with people. Say, I really appreciate this. If you have an opportunity that is absolutely outstanding and it is something relevant and like you think that I am qualified for, let's talk. Otherwise, I need some time.
I've heard that from folks before. I've heard people say, it's hard when you're in between jobs. People are inundating you with apply for this, apply for that. And it's not even like what you're qualified for or interested in, or it's
Right.
like way beneath you. And the problem with that is then when you don't apply, people assign a label to you of like, oh, well, you're not trying.
I have seen and heard that so many times where people feel that exactly what you just said. They're like, well, I tried to help you and you didn't want my help, so I'm done. And it's like, no, I do want your help. I value you, friend or colleague or coworker. I do appreciate you. I just don't know what I want yet. And it's more important to be very direct and honest about that. A lot of people won't be. They'll just say, thank you for that. I'm going to look at this and apply. Um, but it also takes a mental bandwidth, like, constantly applying to jobs that one, you may not want, or two, you're not even qualified for potentially. It's going to become exhausting.
Mhm. Yeah. Do you find, I'm just imagining a scenario where you're talking to a friend and you say, hey, friend, by the way, I got to let you know, I was laid off a couple weeks ago. And I'm imagining the friend saying something like, oh no, what happened? Okay, you just you just rolled your eyes.
Yeah, for those listening, I did roll my eyes because that is so standard. And I will be honest, I used to do that. I was guilty of that previously. And then during the pandemic, when a lot of people were getting laid off, things were happening. Like, I really needed to train myself to take a beat on that as well. But yeah, it's more of like, oh no, what happened? It's implied you did something wrong, which only piles on to the feelings of rejection and extends the grieving processes. What people really should say, in my opinion, at least, instead is, I am so sorry to hear that. Is there anything I can do? Do you want to take time or do you want me to help you now? Like, how can I support you? What is the best opportunity landscape for me to be there for you as a colleague, coworker, friend? Otherwise, yeah, it just feels horrible. You're like, oh God, now I have to repeat the story all over again for probably the 90th time this week. And that's why, to your point, maybe it is a couple weeks. People don't always want to share that information openly and publicly. Um, Everyone's different.
Yeah, yeah, I think you nailed it when you said like it implies you did something wrong. And so if you've had to repeat that story 100 times to 100 different people, that's 100 times you've had to stand up and defend yourself and say, no, really, I didn't do anything wrong. They said they love me and they can't afford me. And the company's going through tough times and they had to let go lots of people who they really love. Like it's exhausting to keep having to defend yourself to people who are supposed to just love you and trust you and believe the best of you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love, again, trying to help, but it is exhausting. Other things that, at least in my most recent experience, and I will say the markets have changed so much, right? Prior to the pandemic, when an individual was laid off, let's say, or going through job transitions for whatever the case, right? Like a parent steps back to take care of their child, or maybe it's a dependent, right? You have an elderly parent and then COVID hits, right? So like before the job market, it was very different in that landscape where people don't want to talk about gaps in their employment, right? And this is something I think everyone should be addressing, especially during a layoff and a transition. Like right now, I am actively seeking employment, but at the same time, I'm not pushing on, immediate employment unless the right role comes. But again, going back to gaps of employment, before COVID, people never wanted to put that on a resume. They always wanted to try to fudge dates, see what they could get away with. And, it comes up in employment background checks and those work histories. Then during COVID, so many people were getting laid off, or like there was the great resignation when people were job hopping. So like resumes got really choppy. And then after COVID, and now with certain economic slowdowns, you have people that are unemployed for 2.5 years. I am seeing resumes, as a recruiter, where people haven't had jobs for 2.5 years, specifically in like the Bay Area, the Pacific Northwest, Seattle, New York, a lot of the tech hubs, through no fault of their own. And then maybe after a year of unemployment, they just got absolutely demoralized and exhausted. So they decided to, go and make an Etsy and, be creative and take a break for 6 months more. There's so many different things. I think the other advice with that gap of employment that people love to say when they're only trying to help, but is unhelpful, is telling you hide the employment gaps. They're like, oh, you got to get out there and just take any job, accept the first job that comes along. You can't have a gap in your employment. My advice is absolutely not. You got to pause and then just be honest and open about it, and let future employers know, I decided to take a sabbatical and backpack Spain. I don't know, whatever the case is, right? Or my father had cancer. I took a year off for that type thing. So the other area, and I guess it's a two-part area of like the employment gaps, but also when friends tell you, just take any job. You can't have a gap on your resume. Like, it's unhelpful. It doesn't look professional. It looks like you're not willing to work and try. I think that's really unhelpful advice.
Mm-hmm. I love when I am recording the podcast and someone shares a thing that I realize I'm the one who's guilty of. So you just nailed one. And I think I did it to you. So let me just share it on the podcast. But I run a business, and sometimes I need like a little bit of part-time help here and there. And like, I'm not looking to really hire someone for a long-term way. It's like for a project or something. And I will often think about, who do I know who may be between jobs right now and want to fill a gap? And I will reach out to them and say, I know this isn't what you really want to do with your life, but if you would like to do something to fill a gap on your resume, I have a project you could help with. And I think I've done that to you. And, it is, of course, like you said, well-meaning. My heart was in the right place. There was nothing malicious about that. But you're also making a good point that it is just perpetuating an idea that it is bad to take breaks for whatever reason you may have taken your break. And what might be healthier for our society is to just own those breaks and get more comfortable talking about them and saying, listen, I had 2 kids. I needed to be home for a little bit. Or my dad had cancer. I had to take care of him. Or I just decided to go find myself or whatever. But if we became,
Eat, pray, love.
Yeah, if we supported that a little bit better, perhaps the world would change, and we wouldn't feel this pressure to fill the gaps the way that, you're right, we once did, for sure.
Well, 3 quick things on that. One, I'm still interested in helping work. So
Okay.
I'm still there. No, and I see your point, but like, to be clear, I did not take offense by you reaching out. I did find it helpful because you framed it in a very, like, I'm here if you want. And that's, I guess, the language is important too, right? When an individual is going through a period of unemployment, in the email you sent to me, your language was very helpful. It was like, it's available. You don't have to, but here's somebody to talk to if you want it, right? Like, it didn't feel like you were just trying to shove a job on me, right? Which I appreciate. The second thing, to your point, in working in talent acquisition for over 14 years, the landscape that a lot of people fail to think of is how humans are just living and working longer. We are not going to have the same careers or jobs that our parents and grandparents had in tenure, right? So I know my grandfather worked at the exact same company for 35 years. My grandmother worked at 3 jobs over a 50-year career. That's it. She had 3 jobs in 50 years. Um, my parents were a little bit different, but our generation is birthing the people that are going to live well into their hundreds for the first time ever. Individuals born today are like the generations that will live not even just into their hundreds, but with health, right? When people are working and living so much longer, we're going to have more careers. We're going to have more gaps in employment. We're going to have more career transitions. And to your other point, and this is my third point, culture. There is such a stigma still for people at least in capitalist cultures, and I think predominantly the United States as the primary example, where everyone has to be productive all the time. Like if you are viewed as taking a break from work life, it is so stigmatized. It's like, oh, well, what did you do during that time? Did you go get another degree? Did you do self-education? Like, did you, I don't know, learn to cook or something? Like build a
Did
house in
you
Jamaica?
did you at least clean out your garage or something?
Right. Like if you just tell people like you spent 3 weeks laying on the sofa decompressing after a layoff and watching nothing but Bridgerton repeats, like people look at you like you need to be institutionalized. Like, and that is something I wanted to do, but I didn't tell people, and I actually did that. It is absolutely bizarre to me, but to your point, and this is my third, and I'll wrap it up on this statement at least, but it's the culture is so weaponized that if you're unproductive, if there's a gap in your resume, you're not viewed then in the future as an individual that could contribute as a high performer to a new employer or team, which is wildly unfortunate. I know people that work at companies like Meta. They have a program, or at least they used to. I haven't looked into it this year, where if you were an employee for 5 years, you were given a pretty much mandatory 30-day sabbatical. 5 years of work, you were told, okay, now you get 30 days plus your PTO and like all that other vacation accruals off. It is mandatory. You have to take a month break on top of other vacation you've earned. I think that should be acknowledged. I would love to say after 5 years, half a decade, you should probably get like a 4-month paid sabbatical. Like you've really earned it, I think, at that point. But, at least a month is something better than nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, as usually happens on this podcast, something comes up that makes me want to like totally go down a whole new path. And this will just have to be another episode, another day. This idea of productivity, because I've been thinking even about our hobbies, and I'm using air quotes for the audience who can't see. I'm using air quotes because even our hobbies are things that now the expectation is like, oh, if you like painting, you should sell your paintings and make a business. Or if you enjoy yoga, you should become a yoga instructor and teach classes on the weekend. And we do have listeners in other countries who will probably be listening to us saying, what are you talking about? I think this is a very United States thing where like your hobbies must be either monetized to be somehow productive that way, or if they're not monetized, they ought to at least be competitive, like sports. Like we will make an exception for sports because it's competitive. But like if you're not playing a sport, you better be doing something you can sell.
It is out. I mean, yeah, we could talk about this so much more. I'm thinking of one of my great aunts. She, in her later years in retirement, got into quilting. Mm-hmm. And she did it because she enjoyed it. And she just loved making quilts. And she wanted to give them as holiday presents and, big life event presents. She would take people's like t-shirts from university and turn it into a quilt type thing for everyone. But then after like 2 or 3 years of this, her children and family members sometimes started pressuring her to turn it into a business. They were like, well, you're doing it all the time anyway. You might as well start selling the quilts. They were offered to set up a website, and like she just pushed back and she was like, absolutely not. But the poor woman in her 70s was under pressure to monetize her quilting. To be prime example.
Yeah. Right. And Unfortunately for you, Ryan, you were not able to monetize or make competitive watching Bridgerton repeats on your couch.
I know, but I'm sure there's TikToks out there, right? Where people are monetizing themselves watching and commenting on Bridgerton and, the theories behind it. But yeah,
Yeah.
here we are.
Anyway, that was a lovely detour. Should we get back to, some of the things that you think are well-meaning, or have we exhausted your list?
I'm sure there's a lot more. Well, if we're going to continue down this road, and I'm sure we might have some more detours, another thing that I will say that people frequently have given me over the past couple of weeks, and I have caught myself being guilty of this too, previously to other people, basically telling them to go out and focus on full-time roles. Like, okay, you're unemployed, you need to get back in the market, you need to get a 401k, you need health insurance, you need benefits. You're only going to get that with a full-time role. One other culture shift I think we are experiencing after COVID, at least in an employment capacity, right, is companies are obviously no longer providing the same compensation before COVID. It's went down, not a lot, but we're seeing drops of 7, 8, 10% on full-time salaries. Benefits are not as robust as they used to be. And companies are not keeping people as long anymore. Like, layoffs are just another part of business cycle. Layoffs have increased, but there is something to be said for a little bit more of ownership of your career and your future. But if you are an individual who has some skills that can be used in different areas instead of just a full-time capacity job, like, you show up, go to work, 9 to 5, you're done. You got to find different revenue streams if at all possible. So when people say, just get out there, find any full-time job immediately. Again, if you have the financial resources to wait a little bit, unemployment, insurance, whatever the case, maybe getting laid off is a chance to discover a little bit of an entrepreneurial side of yourself, right? So in the future, when you take your time to find the full-time job you do want, that's the right alignment and the right company and the right landscape and the work you want to accomplish, you might now have 2 or 3 different revenue streams instead of just relying on a sole revenue stream. And I think, interesting enough, Gen Z has figured this out. They figured it out before anyone else. Like, they're out there like learning how to have so many different skills and already like figuring out revenue and incomes, much more successful than I ever was.
Yeah, I have a million examples of this. I got to tell you, I'm surprised you think that's so controversial. Maybe in your field it is. But for example, myself, I was a full-time professor at a college and I loved it. And I had like a little, what I called my side hustle, this little business on the side. And I never really intended for that business to like grow and grow and grow and grow. It kind of accidentally did. And at one point it was like, I just can't do both of these things anymore. Something's got to give. And I realized, I love teaching, but I'd really prefer to do it more like 10 hours a week than 40. And so I was able to reduce that revenue stream of what was once my full-time job down to no longer a full-time job with benefits, but a little part-time job. And then I could really let my business flourish. And so I was able to decide, like, okay, here's the pot of income I'd like to have. Now, what percentage will come from this gig and what percentage will come from that gig and what percentage will come from some other gig? And I work with clients all the time who do the same thing. They say, you know what? I love my job. I really do. I love it. I love it. I love it. But I'd love it more if I did it 20 hours a week instead of 40. And they say, I'm thinking about just doing it 20 hours a week because it's the perfect job for me for 20 hours a week. And then I think maybe I'll walk the neighborhood dogs or, maybe I'll do something else. But like I can make up the lost income doing some other things. And I see people find a lot of happiness in that.
I agree. I have always tried to just have one job. Why did I previously just think that way? There was something ingrained in me, I think. But in the 2 months that I've been unemployed, I have been able to cobble together multiple consulting and freelance opportunities that actually is earning me more than what I earned in the full-time job. Now, I don't have health insurance. I'm on, I'm on like a Cobra plan. So like there are some downsides to that, at least for me. And again, going back to like kind of where I'm coming in today, like when you're recently unemployed, there are other considerations to thinking about that. But like it's fun. Like what you're saying, like I'm meeting people I would not have met all the time in my full-time roles. But also I'm networking and I'm getting referred and handed different opportunities with different companies and landscapes than I probably would not have opportunity to connect with outside of just a full-time role. So like, I don't know. I think, and maybe to my earlier statement about hustle culture, I feel like there is a lot of negative backlash to that because there's like the whole what is it, Mr. Toad and Fox movement now, where like just enjoy your like three-wheel bicycle and like a pub of beer, which I do think is important. But if you're an individual that is encouraged and motivated and energized by multiple projects like you are, and I'm finding myself recently, nothing wrong with it.
Yeah, I think the backlash of hustle culture is the idea that you must like work until you bleed and work, 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 work. And you and I are not saying that. Think of the whole tangent we went on about we should all just sit around and watch Bridgerton. I prefer to think of it, so I didn't make this up. Somebody said, you're sort of like the CEO of your own company. And you get to decide like how much time you spend in which department. And I've often thought of it as I'd rather work really hard building my own dream than somebody else's. I could work really hard at some full-time job to serve the mission that the president of that company has set forward, or I can make my own vision and work really hard at that, or work as hard as I want to at that. And there are times where I work a lot less hard, and that's great because I get to make those decisions.
No, I love that. That's something I'm actually going through thinking right now as well. It's like, well, maybe I just continue this. Maybe I don't go back to corporate world, which has its pluses, but also a lot of negatives. Like, I don't know, being told that you have to badge in and badge out of your building. Otherwise, like you're going to lose like your performance review potentially could decrease because you didn't swipe in and out of the building often enough compared to your coworkers. It's like, how does that mean I'm productive? Like, honest to God.
Yeah.
Like, if you're measuring productivity based on a badge swipe, like that was one of my biggest pet peeves at like some other companies I worked at.
Yeah. Yeah. And, even as you and I are sort of high-fiving on this, I know other people who have dreamt of that kind of life of, I'm my own boss. I have different revenue streams. I have various part-time work or consulting. And they come to find out it's really not for them. And that's okay too, folks. Like Ryan and I are not on this show telling you this is the life you have to have.
Correct.
The message is let's open up options. And some people might still really prefer the 9 to 5 badge in and badge out, sit at the desk kind of thing. And other people do not. And let's just make them all accessible.
Absolutely. I still think in Scott Galloway, who is one of the individuals I highly admire. I don't know. I will give some free advertising here to the podcast Pivot with Kara Swisher and Scott Galloway. Obsessed with them. And they talk about how working at a corporation, your 9 to 5, is one of the largest generational wealth producers, right? Like if you stay in a company, you stay in corporations, you're able to have stability somewhat more. And just the 401k and the health insurance and taking care of your family if you decide to have children and those things. So they are, corporations are stabilizers. They are places that people can earn good money. And if that's for you forever, it's great. I may go back to that. I don't know. My point, though, to your point, is we are discussing the opportunities, right? Like pros and cons, all of the spaces there, but who knows?
Yeah. Yeah. Who knows? Indeed. A lot of things would have to change in our country for folks to fully embrace it. Like you kept mentioning health insurance,
Oh
I
my
remember
God.
I remember so many years ago, I guess it would have been probably in the Obama administration, but I'm not sure if the Affordable Care Act had happened yet. But I remember a friend of mine in England said, I think I'm going to leave my job and just work for myself. And I looked at her and said, well, what will you do for health insurance? And she goes,
Yep.
I'm British. Like, we don't have this worry. And that's when I thought to myself, wow, as Americans, we have this knee jerk reaction of, but health insurance. Like, is this the reason we get out of bed every day? I know there are people who will
Yes.
say, the reason I get out of bed every day is because I need goddamn health insurance. And like this is the sad reality. And so anyway, I'm not trying to get political, only to say the world would have to change for our not the world, our country would have to change for our country to really fully embrace the idea of, well, I just won't have a full-time job. I'll just go do what I want.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a lot of the reasons I've stayed in corporations. And it's like, I need health insurance. Like, I have medical conditions that require long-term treatments and medications and mental health and all of those things, and they're tied to your employer. I'm paying out of pocket for my therapist right now, which is not sustainable long term because he's amazing, but he is also very expensive. My employer was covering the cost of him. So while I was employed, I had free mental health care. And it's one of the main reasons I stayed so long at my last employer. Um, it wasn't the perfect workplace, but it was good. And they provided literally free mental health care. Um, so yeah, no, I literally, and that's what I would tell people, like, I can't not have health insurance. I need a job. And now that I'm on the open market and I'm looking at different marketplaces and Cobra, like my Cobra is $1,600 a month right now. It is not sustainable long term. Like it is absurd.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but I do want to go back to one more thing. I don't know how much more time we have left here. The last thing that I will also say, and this isn't necessarily about what other people are going to say or do that is unhelpful when they're only trying to help. I do want to make sure that at least if we're going to end, I am giving advice to people that you are actions that I see people unemployed do on LinkedIn that is unhelpful to themselves. I
Yeah.
really wanted to bring that up today. Um, if you are unemployed, I will never tell you what to do or not to do on LinkedIn. It is a personal decision how you want to advertise it or choose not to advertise it. I waited several weeks before saying anything on LinkedIn personally. Um, but pause and think if it's going to be helpful for you to do kind of a hero post. So in the recruiting and talent communities, there are things on LinkedIn that we now refer to as hero posts. When somebody is laid off from a job, terminated, whatever the case is, separated, they go on LinkedIn and they have like a 40 paragraph hero post. Like, oh my, I am so grateful for this opportunity. It was the most amazing 60 days of my life at this company. Like, and then they tag in like, 20 different people that they worked with at the company, thanking them for the opportunities that they had while they were employed there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then going on to list out, you know, all of their skills, all the things that you would normally just have in your LinkedIn profile already, hopefully, like your work history, your skills, all this type of thing. Um, I'm only trying to help. It is probably, as a recruiter, not great to see a hero post, right? And then on the other side, you know, it's frustrating. It's demoralizing being unemployed. If you don't know what you want yet, you're taking time to figure it out. My advice is don't go in LinkedIn. Just don't. Like, delete it from your phone, step back, give yourself some
Wow.
space. Like, it is not mentally encouraging to go on LinkedIn all the time when you're unemployed, or do what I do, set up some time periods in your calendar. Like, I was scrolling it, doom scrolling LinkedIn constantly at first, trying to figure out, like, on the, like, oh my God, I need a job again, probably for my health insurance. It was not mentally healthy, and it was making me more depressed and feeling worse about myself. So I scheduled twice a day, 45 minutes, once in the morning, once in the afternoon, that I'd allow myself to go in LinkedIn. That's a personal thing that I found healthy as a boundary for me in the job search. May not apply or work for everyone, of course. Um, but there's a lot of negativity on LinkedIn now too, in addition to some helpful advice.
Okay, I want to summarize some of that because I think you packed a lot of things in there. So when you said like delete it from your phone, you don't mean don't use LinkedIn at all. You mean set a healthy boundary with LinkedIn. And if it's on your phone, you're going to be tempted. So it's better to just
Yes.
access it on your computer at scheduled times so that you can keep it under control and you're not spiraling on LinkedIn. So that's really important, I think. And then when you were talking about the hero post, I was over here laughing my butt off because I have seen a million of those. And now I know what to call them. I love that I have a word for it because you see them a lot. And I'm laughing because they do seem kind of silly, but can you just say very clearly what, as a recruiter, makes that kind of cringy for you?
Absolutely. And it's not just me. There are like private Slack channels and communities for a lot of talent acquisition people where we talk about it. Um, I don't know if people know that, but like recruiters, we all know each other. These are small, well, within certain industries and field. I primarily work in media and tech. Everyone knows each other and we've all worked at the same companies and we hop around all the same companies. There are private Slack communities. Um, what is cringy about a hero post is like, we get it as a recruiter. Like, you're unemployed, you're trying to raise your profile back on LinkedIn. Tagging a lot of people in increases views. It is an algorithm, and like the more views and the more like higher up, your post can become visible and all those things. Like, we understand the behind the scenes work. Most of us are LinkedIn experts. Like, we've had training. We know what you're doing, number one. Two, we do feel bad for you. All of us feel bad for that in that landscape, excuse me. But again, just like a 10 paragraph, like, I am the hero of this work environment. I thank you for everything. It was a pleasure. Like, you don't need to set yourself up into a landscape where it's like you're exiting as like, Batman or something from the Batcave and like handing up your Batcave and like, now looking to transition into becoming Alfred or something. Like, we get it. Like, you don't need to just like advertise constantly, constantly, constantly. Like, a simple post saying, hey, my last day at this organization was XYZ. I'm now unemployed. There were layoffs or impacts, or just like, I quit, like whatever the case. And then say, I'm looking for work. Does anyone know? That is much more like, okay, cool. I'm going to like now look at this person and like, and no recruiter is going to read your hero post. Like, we're going to see it for what it is and just skip it. And like, we're not even going to look at your profile.
The words that come to mind, the words that come to mind when you describe that are self-indulgent.
Very much.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So the simpler post, which is just like, hey, I'm no longer with this company and I'm looking for opportunities, is much less self-indulgent. It's just to the point and portrays you more like a normal person.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Cool. Ryan, thank you so much for doing this. You've made me think of a whole bunch of other podcast topics that I think we should do, and I'm going to pitch one to you right now, which we won't do it right now, but this is me putting out there that I'd like you to come back and talk about networking because I think
Oh,
there
yes.
I think there are a lot of well-meaning things people do. Like, I'm just going to throw one out there that's been on my mind lately, which is like someone I know wants to connect someone they know to me. So they hand out my email address. And I'm like, I'm starting to feel like you're just handing out my email address to people. And I would like to think that my network would protect me a little bit more from just like spammy messages. And I think that well-meaning person who thinks like, oh, I'm going to connect you to, that person's heart is in the right place. But that person doesn't realize how many of those messages I get a day. And it's starting to really bother me. Like, I feel like I'm getting overexposed by my own network.
We could absolutely do probably a series of podcasts on that, not even just one, but I would happily return and talk to you for 45 minutes about that.
Yeah, let's do that. And as your head is probably filling with all these ideas, as soon as we end here, I encourage you to just like type them all out so we don't lose them. But again, thank you so much. I had a great time, and we'll do it again.
Thank you. Love you, Kate.
Take me in your arms. I don't want to miss a day without you. Let's stay young forever. There is nothing we can't do. And nothing can break us apart when we're together. Facing the sky, we know that we can fly on the wings of love. And we can climb on every mountain top. I never knew eternity was real till I met you. Since that day, I live in a dream.